Well, thank you very much. I want to start with three main points. First,
È arrivato.
Vi aspetta, sì, sì, è arrivato.
many papers here. So I have to start with three main points. First, a thank you note, a large thank you note to Bishop Marcelo Sanchez Solondo, Bishop and Chancellor, to Stefano Samagni, and to Gustavo Vélez. To Gustavo Vélez is double thanks, not only for being invited here, but also because in the year 2016, he gave us the mission to do a research on the issue of the future of work and its impact integration in Latin America when he was the head of Intal in Argentina. And this showed us that it was an important priority for Argentina during the G20 that I could propose because of the knowledge I got. And in the same way, I want to thank you all because with this multidisciplinary exercise we had here, I have learned a lot from you. So the second note that I want to say is that, well, my paper, like every other paper, is there, but the first reference, the first part of the paper is a summary of a paper that is already published in an economics journal of the Kiel University, and the data and the graphics, etc., are all in the paper. I decided to focus more on qualitative issues here than started reviewing the data because I will value very much afterwards your contribution, questions, criticism, etc., to make a better paper afterwards. And the last related to the organization of what I'm going to say. First, I'm going to review the literature. Second, I'm going to identify the main findings and the challenges associated with these findings in the economic literature. And fourth, I'm going to make a proposal. The policy proposal I'm making it is basically for the international level. Why? Because it was too complex to give advice at national level since circumstances vary for different nations. You can make some general principles, but not go beyond that. And also because there, like Jeff showed yesterday, there are very important also changes needed at the international level to push this agenda forward. So what is the purpose? How do you remove this? Oh, that one, sorry. Okay, this one to advance? Yes. Okay. So what is the purpose of the presentation? First, to understand the challenges associated with technological change, accelerated digitalization and automation, so as that we can all contribute to build a path for a more inclusive, dignified, and sustainable future of work. The new technological paradigm is both, in my opinion, singular and disruptive because of its reach and its exponential speed. It has transformed already the way we work, communicate, interact, and exchange, and it has impacted not only in the economy and globalization, but also in the social, cultural, political, and geopolitical spheres at the world level. Yesterday, I learned also from sister here, we exchanged afterwards, given our difference. He thinks this is not singular. I think it's singular, but she explained me why she thinks it's dangerous sometimes when people say that it's singular. It's because they don't learn from history. On the contrary, I think there are very important lessons to be learned from history, and this is why we have some practical recommendations here, policy recommendations. Well, more changes are expected, and the pace of change will probably accelerate. I also want to say, I didn't put it in here in the presentation, but it's in the introduction, that this is one major structural change, but it's going along or accompanied by other major structural changes. I think Enrico Di Giovanni showed it today, which is increasing globalization, growing inequality, rapid urbanization, the servification of industry, climate change accompanied by biodiversity loss, etc. We must realize that in the midst of an accelerated technological change, with the major structural forces underway in the world, both the emerging opportunities as well as the emerging risks and costs of inaction are increasing also exponentially. And regarding the path ahead, I think there are two very ambitious landmark agreements, which are the Sustainable Development Agenda and the Paris agreements that mark the pathway ahead. They're like a guide, but we risk being late in meeting those targets. So, and these two agreements are also related with the issue of the future of work, like it was shown today. So, the research review, what do we know from recent history? This is a review, well, in the paper you have all the literature, but we found that the work of David Autor and MIT with his colleagues is very illuminating. The same you presented the paper, Marcelo, Brian Bricholson, I don't know how it's pronounced, from the National Academy of Sciences of the United States, that is also at MIT. The work in Europe of Goss, Manning, Van Renning. There are a number of authors, Acemoglu, from which, so this is basically the knowledge and a summary, very strict of the knowledge I gained from all of them. Also, there are other people that have worked more on the issue of inequalities. First, there is, in spite of the fear, there is not yet a widespread substitution of human labor. Labor aggregates still in developed countries remain in the same levels. However, Otto recognizes that there can be a within, the increasing productivity associated with technological change may lead to a within decrease in employment compensated by an indirect, a within decrease compensated by an indirect increase in employment in industries related by backward and forward linkages. That has happened in the past and seems to be happening right now. The second trend is a sharply disrupted composition of labor with large distributed impact. This is what Jeff showed, the pattern of employment polarization, called the hollowing pattern, which is the slow or the fall of middle skill jobs, no? Routine jobs, both blue collar and white collar, and the growth of high skill jobs and of low paid service jobs. This is because of the employment polarization or hollowing out pattern. Then the second problem is not only the employment polarization, it's a growing skill mismatch and the problem of massive worker transition. It's not that jobs are not created, but the problem is that the skills of the workers whose jobs has been substituted by technology or automated are not the skills of demanded by the new occupation. So there is a problem of growing skill mismatch that needs to be addressed, and there is a massive worker transition. McKinsey did a study estimating that in the next 10 years from here until 2030, between 75 and 375 million employments are going workers are going to be in transition to new jobs. In your paper, Marcelo, you mentioned ADECO, the chief of ADECO. He uses the data from McKinsey. He didn't say, but when he says that it's going to be 360 million, he's using the data from the McKinsey study. The fourth very important trend is wage inequality affected by employment polarization and skill-biased technological change. The wage compensation pattern didn't reflect the same U pattern. However, because it was not the fall of the middle, of the compensation of the middle skilled workers, the fall in the compensation was of the low skilled workers. So technology indirectly affected the compensation of the low skilled workers. Why? Maybe because of an increased affluence of workers to provide those services that were coming from the middle skills. So indirectly, maybe that was the effect of the automation of jobs. But also, what is observed when you do the analysis of wage compensation by skill level is that there was, what Jeff showed, an increase in the compensation of the high-skilled jobs. The last tendency is a growing inequality, not only within workers, but between labor and capital. Why? First, because both in developed and developing countries, there is observed a declining labor share. And when you try to explain the declining labor share, well, it has to do with the fall, particularly of low skill of the share of labor of low and middle skill jobs, but it's compensated, like I say, there is an increase in the high skill jobs. What is the explanation? There are two explanations here why this is happening, the declining labor share. One has to do with the automation of jobs, and the second, more controversial, has to do with the increasing share of profits. It's not the increasing share of capital. Capital understood as machinery, as investment, is the increased share of profits. And there are studies that show that the increased share of profits is due to increased market concentration. In fact, there are studies, author has done one with Salomons, that correlate increasing market concentration with two dimensions of technological change, which is increased total factor productivity and increased patent intensity. And that's why he says, well, that in the digital world, we are seeing the growth of the rise of the superstar firms. The OECD says, well, the superstar firms explaining why they have this dominance and very large profits is because of what we said today, network externalities, lock-in effects, economies of scale, economies of scope, etc. So what are the findings and the challenges? The three first are almost a replication of what we saw. First, that the technological advances will continue at exponential speed and reach, and probably biggest innovations will be introduced, and new technological capacities that we don't know will emerge. Second, IT-led technical change is both skill and task bias. What gets automated is not the occupation, it's the task, and this is one reason. I'm not addressing here the issue of predictions, but why there is a large variance in predictions. I will say the economic discipline is not up to predict what is going to happen with the future of work, because it's very difficult to predict. But for instance, in the work of, in the seminal work of Frey and Osborne, they say that 47 of the jobs in the United States were at risk because they analyzed occupations. The OECD work by Arns and others, they analyzed tasks, and they concluded that only 9% of the jobs in the US were at risk. So it's a very large variance. We cannot predict, not only because it's very difficult, it's very different to say what is the potential impact of technological change on employment, or what is the estimated impact, because the final impact is not predetermined, which is the third point. It depends not only how technology is designed and used, it depends on how governments, firms, institutions, and even people, individuals, react, no, and prepare for these changes. So I think it's better until now to analyze what is happening than rather try to do a large effort at predictions. We don't yet have the necessary data to do, or indicators to do predictions. Fourth, it has been said here, the education and training systems will need to constantly adapt in order to improve, first, the quality of education and widen its access, and second, to prepare the workforce for the changing labor market. Like it was said yesterday, and I'm glad it's a recommendation, I think we should all agree that lifelong learning should be enacted as a new workers' right internationally. 5, IT is enabling new forms of work on demand via apps and via remote crowd work through digital platforms with significant potential for employment growth, labor inclusion, and transparency. But as well with potential risks. ILO has pointed out this regarding social security, employment protection, large working hours, and even issues of health and safety, occupational health and safety. Challenges. Well, we didn't address the issue here, only marginally by comments. Jeff, I think, wrote a paper somewhere. I received the paper, what would the impact of technological change be on the pathways of developing countries. Well, this was written before I received the paper, but really there is already technological change, this new kind, based on robotization, is resulting in reshoring of some relatively low-skill intensive manufacturing activities and the shortening of global manufacturing chains. This could result in significant disruption for emerging countries that have integrated in global production chains, or limit the opportunity of other lower-income countries that want to climb the ladder of development and progress by promoting manufacturing export-led development. The World Bank has a very good study that I quote, where they raise this issue, that it's going to be difficult for others because of these changes in technology. On the other hand, and this is the paradox, this is always, no, like it was said yesterday, we shouldn't be technophobia, ni techno-optimistic, ni techno-pessimistic. Digitalization, particularly the increased service associated with the increased service intensive of manufacturing, is enabling the participation and maybe the leapfrogging of developing countries through the export of knowledge-intensive services. This could be a potential new ladder for productive and export diversification. You know there is a lot of study being done at Harvard and MIT. You have the MIT Harvard of Economic Complexity. All the countries that converge in the world after the Second World War, starting by Japan, converge in terms of development, Japan, Korea, Southeast Asia, etc., China, they did it by productive diversification. What about the two continents in the world that have not converged? Which are the two continents? One is Africa, and the other is particularly South America. I will say Latin America except Mexico. Mexico has a monopoly locational advantage, which is south of the border of the United States, which other countries do not enjoy, and has allowed Mexico to develop through the NAFTA and a more sophisticated manufacturing sector. But what is the common characteristic of Africa and Latin America? They are integrating the economy as commodity exporters. What happened with commodity exporters? The income of the country fluctuates according with commodity prices. I won't get here, but if you want, you can ask me the question. I will be pleased. There were two things I wanted the G20 Argentina to have an outcome. Of course, I was not there when I was there in the preparation. The organization was not there in 2018. One was not even touched upon, which is a key issue for sustainable development. And it's key issue to eliminate poverty and hunger in Africa, for the development of Africa, and for the development and conversion also of Latin America, which is end agricultural protectionism. I'm not going to get here, but if you want, we can explain, because it will allow these countries to productively diversify through the export of high value-added foodstuff. But there is an opportunity through the export of knowledge-intensive services. Let me quote simply, there is a very interesting Harvard study. It was published, it's a ranking, it's not a study. It was published 1 or 2 weeks ago, where they rank countries in terms of the capacities of firms in this digital work, the capacities of people, and the third one, I don't remember which it is. But in the capacities of firms, of course, Argentina is not among the 10 first, Italy is not. I was showing this to Rocco yesterday night. But in technical capacities of people, Argentina was ranked first in a Harvard new ranking regarding the capacities in the digital economy. This is amazing, And we are actually exporting like it's the third export complex in Argentina, knowledge-intensive service. We're exporting $6 billion, and milling not only software, professional services, cultural exports, etc. Well, the 7th point I want to make is the strong distributive, we saw impact, we have talked about this among workers, but also among firms, and between workers and firms, with the rise of superstar firms, is open a huge policy debate around the redistribution issue. One thing is to prepare, the other is to redistribute, which goes beyond universal income and touches issues of tax policy, competition policy, and beyond that. This has not been talked, it's very recent, but artificial intelligence, which is the leading edge of new technological change, is raising among academics or researchers 2 other sources of concern. The first one is that the market power and the pioneer innovation age deriving from the ownership of big data centers and the huge computing firepower required to develop futuristic technology. So this is in the hands of the few large companies. What do researchers fear in this regard? A future of artificial intelligence and deep learning software models where only a few big tech companies will have the staggering amount of computer resources needed for invention, for innovation, and this poses a threat to university research and invention. So this is a very serious concern. Are we going to have in the future research and invention monopolized among few large technology companies. And the second is something Cecile presented today, more related to the production issue, but here is the energy power use of artificial intelligence software. The new research by the University of Massachusetts in Amherst that shows that to train one deep learning model has the same carbon footprint as 5 cars during all the lifetime. So, because this needs a lot of computing power, no? So this is another thing to be aware. So I raised a question, which I'm not going to answer here, but is somehow addressed in the conclusion where I refer to a statement, a priority of Pope Francis. Could these superstar firms make larger commitments, and then we can discuss whether this should be regulatory or through incentive systems, to help meet the challenges of the future of work and contribute to the SDGs 2030 and the Paris Agreement goals, while supporting at the same time open artificial intelligence research at the universities in order to help preserve the planet and the dignity of work? It's not only a question of governments. We need the involvement, and the involvement of those who have the resources and the capabilities to precisely to contribute in this process. Challenges. Well, the 9th and 10th, since it's going to be in the proposals, I'm going to go very briefly, is basically has to do with data measurement and research. The first, I think, to better inform public policy and private decisions, we need a more systematic, continuous, and comparable international research effort to track new technological developments and its impact on employment, the workforce, the economy, both in advanced and developing countries. And the second, there are dramatic information failures in the job market. If you wanted to do comparable international studies, you could study the impact of the technology in the United States and in Europe. Those were the best. In the developing countries, the information is not good at all. But you cannot talk because they are not harmonized. The occupational taxonomies are not harmonized, so you can't really compare. You are measuring different things. So my proposals are linked in this regard. So these proposals, except the last one, which I wrote now, but initially I thought would be a good outcome of starting a discussion of future of work in G20 in Argentina, ending with a menu of policy options, but no with concrete initiatives of any sort. The first one is to track technological development globally, and have an effort with governments, international organizations in a multidisciplinary, collaborative, and comparative world research program. One important thing in my view is to avoid duplication efforts. Looking to the literature, there were very good studies done by the IMF, very good studies done by the World Bank and by the OECD. They all repeat the same. They all studied the routinization, the polarization pattern, they develop index or routinization. Why don't we try to specialize and avoid everybody doing the same, maybe with a little bit a twist different in the methodology? But this is something I think someone leading the effort and knowing what you need in research can organize at the international level. It's not very difficult. Like you would do in a university, you will specialize areas to do different types of research. Second, develop new methods of measurement for the digital economy. This is related to the issue of national accounts. The national account system we're using must adapt to measure the 21st century economy and not just the 20th century economy. The digital economy is not very well, it's not measured, and this is one of the reasons of the productivity puzzle. It's not only the weakening investment, it's we're not measuring very well, and this is part of a long-term effort, but I think they are the G20 leaders. The G20 is like and I say this, and I forgot this at the introduction, because Italy is going to have the G20 here in 2021. It's going to have the presidency. And when you have the president, the G20 is the steering committee of the world. And it's the only forum where developed and developing countries sit together and talk. And although it's not a regulatory institution, whatever principles they agree, they inform afterwards the lending policies of multilateral financial institutions. They inform the policies of national governments. So it's a very important process. And because of its dialogue, multi-stakeholder with engagement groups, here, for instance, I think that religions and different religions, like the dialogue Pope Francis is promoting should be part of the G20. The G20 has different engagement groups: business, labor, women, think tanks. I'm working, after I resigned, I've been working with the T20 track all the time, science. But there is no track for legislators. It's only executives. There is no track for legislators. I think it will be good at some point, because in the democracy there is alternancy. There is no, so those who are in government are replaced by others. So I think it's good to have a track of legislators, to have the voice of minorities and the opposition. And also there is not, I think all these efforts should be towards the common good. And of course there are very different religious approaches to this, but we should have an interreligious dialogue also as one of the engagement groups. I think in the G20 will be great contribution. Well, why harmonize the occupational taxonomy? Like we said, technological change is task bias. The only two countries, one is a region and one in country, that have an occupational taxonomy where you have occupations divided by tasks, and you can actually do an analysis of which occupations are the most susceptible to be automated, is the US with the ONNET, which is a taxonomy updated every year for a small research group by a small research group from the University of Pennsylvania, and then Europe that developed afterwards the ESCO. At the world level, we don't have anything, Argentina. So we don't have anything, we're blind. However, it's paradoxical that when the globalization of goods was flowing, all countries in the world got together in 1998 and they decided to harmonize the customs denomination and the tariffs, the tariff codes. Why? Because it was important in order for the free flow of goods. So this is less important. We're talking about people and massive work transition and migration, and we're not, and changes in the content of work, and we're not harmonizing data. We also need statistics. Labor surveys are 1 year old, and this is very fast. And in order to inform education, it's very good also to have an idea of what is the change in employment demands and the change in skill demands. And here I think some collaboration with the big data generated in digital platforms and professional networks is good. We have done an experience with the IBD, with LinkedIn, and really, when you go across countries and you compare which occupation, for instance, we show that one occupation growing everywhere across the G20 countries was software developer. One occupation declining everywhere was administrative staff. One other occupation declining everywhere was the guy who came and fixed your computer. Why? Because now you use the cloud. So there are interesting insights to be derived from this sort of analysis. Of course, there are limitations because it's not statistical, it's not universal, and also because there is a certain bias in the sample, not because the company is biased, but because most of us who are in the professional network platforms are somehow in the service sector. In the manufacturing sector, is much less represented. And these are more active, not concerned to data. I think it will be very important also at the international level to build collaborative platforms for digital skills and for the digital transformation of SMEs. This also, if we could develop a multi-stakeholder agreement with technology companies, in order to articulate with initiative of national governments, to develop collaborative platforms to educate and train people on digital skills and to propel the digital transformation of SMEs. Small and medium enterprises are key to meet the pressing and daunting employment challenges in the world. They represent already 95% of the companies in almost every country of the world, according to the WTO. They concentrate about 60% of jobs in the developed countries and 80% in developing countries, according to the World Bank report, and are estimated to account for 60 to 7% of global GDP, according to the UN report in SDGs. So digital transformation, and we have examples in the developed world. I quoted there the examples. We have in Germany, Platform Industry 4.4, France, Industria del Futuro, Spain, Industria Conectada 4.0, but the developing countries, I mean, they don't have, think about Africa, they don't have the capabilities, so we need an agreement with the technology companies at the national level that could be articulated then with initiatives by national and subnational companies. This will be very important because national governments do not have the capacity to negotiate this. And these companies are global and they have the resources. And it's in their own selfish interest because if you have the capabilities, they will use the resources afterwards. So, and this is the last one. This is not in the paper. And this is related to the issue that Jeff raised, no? Taxing the wealth. If we cannot tax the wealth globally, at least let's not subsidize it anymore, because this increases inequality. Now, there is an ongoing discussion of a future international framework for investment facilitation. I mentioned this in a comment yesterday. This now is an agreement. The last WTO Ministerial Conference in Buenos Aires, several countries signed an agreement to bring these discussions to WTO. And they are starting this year to identify which elements of an agreement there is consensus to be presented and to be discussed in the year 2020. I think the conference is going to be in Kazakhstan. Traditional investment facilitation agreements deal only with rules for the predictability and transparency of the investment environment. They don't get into the incentive issues. But I think we need to get into the incentive issues. Why? For different reasons. First, because the commercial warfare between the United States and China has many different reasons. One is who is going to control the digital world, who's going to have the hegemony of the digital revolution in the years to come. But the other has to do with subsidies. And Trump, I mean, I don't like Trump, but when he says that there's been massive facets in the manufacturing sector, he's right. So I think what the core of the proposal is to build consensus for an international agreement that states whatever investment incentives are awarded in the future, they cannot rely anymore on corporate income tax exemptions or other fiscal exemptions aimed at subsidizing profits, that is the compensation of capital. Since they increase inequality in a world that already suffers from growing inequality and from an increase in profit share, they negatively affect the sustainability of public finances, particularly in developing countries, and therefore, if they affect the sustainability of public finances, they affect the predictability of the investment environment, and sometimes they affect the transparency, because there is corruption behind those subsidies. So I think we have to be absolutely transparent and limit this. And the second, and this is positive, this is constructed, we also need to limit the direction of new investment incentives. They only should be given to sustainable investment. Giving incentives to mining companies in Africa is immoral. Immoral. Not only the increased inequality, nothing is left in the country afterwards. So I think only to sustainable investment and only in relation to the labor factor, so as stimulate formal employment creation. The informality of work in the developing world is a form of discrimination, is a form of non-dignifying work. Even if you give a tax credit, no, for the payment of social security contribution, even if it's not new employment, but you are formalizing the existing employment, that's work that is dignifying. In Mexico, the estimates of studies done of informal work is above 50% in Mexico.
Okay. Thank you.
In Argentina, 30. So the other training we need, it's not enough government budgets, we need to get the companies involved in training effort and for research and development, and therefore they will contribute this way to achieve the SDGs. Well, this is crucial for developing countries, like I say, to avail the opportunities which critically rely on the upgrading of skills. Well, basically, as a way of conclusion, we said the impact of technology for employment is not predetermined. It depends on how we all together react. And, but the message is we need to act now in order to disrupt technological unemployment, to prevent non-dignifying work, to prevent the risk of new device, and to harness the opportunities.
Okay.
And finally, the other is as a way of conclusion, but this is a conclusion. Pope Francis has taught us that protecting human dignity must be a government priority. Under his guidance, may we consider all of us advising that protecting human dignity must also be a business priority?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.